read through Job this last week, and man, he really went through it, right? It's like the stereotypic or the, I guess, iconic. You know, if you think of somebody who's gone through suffering, of course, that's why God put it in the Bible. You think of the example of Job and going through all those things. And in my life, anytime I've had a time of real suffering, like, like a toothache or, headache, something really bad like that, I always think, man, I don't even know suffering like Job suffered, and he didn't do anything to deserve it. It seems like just a good guy. And then we have this, and I always read this story, and, he's hit up in chapter 1. He loses his family, he loses his goods, and all this stuff, and what a terrible thing. And then he loses his, he gets these boils on his body. I don't know if you ever had, I don't exactly know what the boils, there's speculations. I don't know exactly what the boils were that it's describing with him, but I've had things so uncomfortable. I think technically, even if you get like an infected hair, I got sometimes, you don't need to know all this. There's more information than you need, but like affected hairs on my legs or something like that, I think that's technically considered a boil nowadays by definition. And sometimes they'll get to hurting and itching. Can you imagine having those severe all over your entire body? And just obviously, this was the thing that was going to get him. It looked like he was just in suffering. It says that his friends came and sat with him. These are some severe boils. They went and sat with him for 7 days and watched this. It looks like, and they said they didn't even say a word, and they just watched him for 7 days in pain. And then he's complaining and all that, rightfully so. You would think. And then his friends, bad company. They're the whole time just kind of criticizing him and calling him bad things. And then every single one of us have probably read this story and thought, hey man, this is the worst part of it all. At least every husband's probably thought this. On top of all this, his wife says, why don't you just curse God and die? And it's like, what in the world? My own wife, she said, dost thou still remain thine integrity? Curse God and die. And it's like, man, that has got to be the lowest of low. But when I was reading this the last time, something stuck out to me. Because there are a lot of stories in the Bible of bitter women who did bitter things, and for whatever reason they were upset and they take it out on their husband or something like that. Understandable. But all of a sudden I was reading this from Job. I had never really thought about that, and I said, you know what? Do we ever read this story and look through her eyes? Now, I'm by no means giving her an excuse for saying what she said or acting like she acted, but I was reading this under a fresh pair of eyes who I've been studying for the last several weeks, and I've been talking about the role of men and manliness, and how the wife is the weaker vessel, and how we're supposed to take care of them and consider their needs and be the strong person and the provider and the protector and all those kinds of things. So I was reading it, and I guess I was looking at it from that perspective, and then all of a sudden I got to thinking, like, wait a minute, his wife, she's going through a lot too, right? And you don't think about, hey, Job, you got to be there for your wife. She's hurting right now. No, you're thinking, man, he's covered with boils. He just lost his family. His wife saying, curse God and die. And you're thinking about his problems. Well, wait a minute. If we're going to look at this from the perspective of, hey, the men are supposed to be those leaders, are supposed to be strong, they're supposed to be able to endure tough times and be there for their family. Now, I'm not saying that there's never a time where a guy is going to break down and really needs his wife to be there for him or somebody to lift him up. But if you can, think about this in terms of what a man should be, I think you could see in many of these stories in the Bible where a woman is just really upset and really bitter, you could turn that around and say, like, well, there's some things she's going through and some things that the man has either knowingly or unknowingly contributed to her feeling that way. And again, I'm not giving her an excuse. She still shouldn't be that way. It's still her emotions and her flesh coming out. But the reality is, men, I'm thinking of this from a perspective of how we should handle this. Sometimes when our wives appear bitter and they appear to be totally just like losing it, and it's really easy for us to just go to the corner of the rooftop, so to speak, like the Bible says, and just be like, women, you know what, and we can't ever understand them, and they're emotional and all this kind of stuff. Well, wait a minute. there's a lot going on that we need to dwell with our wives according to knowledge, and we need to understand that, and we need to consider that so that we can be the strong person in these rough times, even if we're going through a lot ourselves. So anyway, I got to thinking that, and I'm looking at this story of Job. I want to start with that, and then I'm going to give two more. And so we're going to look at three different stories. There's a ton I considered, but these are kind of three of my, I guess I'll just say my favorite, the ones that really stand out to me when I'm considering these. And the first one, Job's wife. Now, I've already kind of mentioned this a little bit, but let's go ahead and go through my points here. So then she said, then said his wife unto him, dost thou still, this is verse 9, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? And all this did not Job sin with his lips. You see, it's easy to recognize that apparently she's not considering who Job is. Because look at chapter 1. This is what God thought about Job. Chapter 1, verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and the man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. And then it describes what his substances were and all that. Now, I don't see anywhere in here that we have a reason to believe that he had any other wives. You know, in fact, there's a place where he says, look at, hold your place there, but go to chapter 31, Job 31. There's a few places in Job that make reference to something similar. I'm just going to read this one verse, but there's a few different places where you can see one of the things that he has determined in his life he's not going to do is to lust after women. And so look at chapter 31, verse 1. He says, I made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? Okay, and then, like I said, there's other verses in here as well where he's talking about this idea, hey, I'm not out there, going after other women or anything like that. I've decided I'm not even going to look upon a maid. And so I have no reason to believe anything other than Job was faithful to his wife, and all of these kids, I would suspect, were her 7 sons, and her 3 daughters. And so you're talking about a family with 10 kids, lots of substance. And by the way, if you got 10 kids, you kind of have to have a lot of substance. You have to provide for them. And so here's a man who's provided, and he has all that stuff, and he's considered the greatest of all the men in the East. And God says he's perfect and upright and all that. Now his wife, during this point of time where she's getting bitter and she's upset and she says things that she's going to regret later on, because she didn't know it was permanently going to be put in the Word of God, and everybody's going to read about that for the rest of eternity. But she forgot that she married a good man. All she knows is she's upset right now, and she's married a guy who has provided for her. He's even got a lot of wealth. You can't always have that, women, but at least if they provide for you and they love you, and here's the most important thing, they love God. Wives, if you have a husband that loves God, you've got the most valuable, that's the most valuable thing. And she had that. She had this man who had a hold of God's heart and was a man after God's heart. He was perfect and eschewed evil. Obviously not without sin. I don't believe that's what's being said here. He had sin, but for the most part, he's just a great, upright man of God. And she forgot that. She forgot about his love, his protection, his provisions, and all that. She forgot that he's hurting at this moment too, physically hurting more than she is. But here's the thing. She did lose her 7 sons and her 3 daughters. I've known people who've lost kids. Now, I've known people who've had miscarriages and lost babies that they haven't even seen, and that's hard. That's terribly hard. I've known people who lost their child after they were already born, and then, even teenagers. I've known people that lost their teenage. I'm telling you, that affects the whole family. But can you imagine the mother? I mean, again, if the mother's the weaker vessel, not just physically but emotionally, and how can she handle that? That's rough. And obviously, guys, I talked this morning in Sunday school about, we finished up our series on femininity versus effeminate, effeminacy. So, like, these things are feminine when women do them, but if guys do them, they're effeminate. We've been talking about that. It's been kind of a fun little study. But, men, considering that the wife is the weaker vessel, and she's softer, and she's needs to be provided for, taken care of. Again, not saying that women can't take care of things and that they're not providers and protectors. And again, I make mention of the virtuous woman. It says she strengtheneth her hands, and she goes out and provides her meat and does all these things. She's a hard worker. But she's going to look effeminate, and I believe she took effort to make herself look effeminate by looking the part of somebody who is in submission and in subjection and all that, because that is a feminine quality. Whereas men are going to be, just hard. So that's why you get this, hey, men don't cry and stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong. Jesus wept, okay? It's not wrong for men to cry, and it's just a natural thing. And so, yes, obviously, if someone loses a child or something drastic happens, it's going to affect a man. But of the two, who do you think is going to be most hurt? Who do you think is going to be likely to be most fragile and most emotional about something like that? And so it would be very needful that the man remembers that, even though he's hurting too, and he remembers that about his wife. And I'm not looking at these stories and putting any blame or saying, Job did wrong or these other men did wrong. That's not necessarily my intention. I'm just saying, hey, from a man's perspective, let's look at that as at the woman's, why is it that she's bitter and all that. So she lost her kids too. Now she's sitting there looking at her husband, who's just in pain. He's frail. He's he's not in a good mood. There's one reference in there where he even says, my breath is strange to my wife, or something like that. I don't even know what he means by that, but he's probably not grooming himself at this point. He's probably not looking very good. There are times where my wife, like, I've been really sick. I don't get sick very often, but when I say really sick, I mean like sometimes I'll get this nausea. I get motion sickness really easily, like in a car. And sometimes I'll get something like that, and I'll be sick. And it's kind of like, maybe some of you have it if you've been on a roller coaster a lot or been riding a thing that spins you around, and then the rest of the day you're just feeling not right. Oh, you guys are like, no, I don't have a problem with that at all. I'm just a weakling, okay? Call me effeminate, call me whatever, but I got a weak stomach when it comes to, that's actually not my stomach, I think it's my equilibrium or something, and it'll make me just super sick. And my wife, here's this guy that's supposed to be the strong man taking care of her and all this stuff, and I'm like, don't touch the bed. Don't touch the bed. I mean, she literally, she couldn't sleep in that bed this whole night. I'm thinking of one particular instance, because I'm like going to die, and if she shook the bed, I'd throw up, and I'm like, don't touch the bed. I got throw up on my face and stuff like that. And she's like, later on the next day, she's taking me to the emergency room because I still didn't feel any better. And I've got this trash can. I'm walking out to the car and she's laughing at me because she's driving in the car. And if she hits a bump, I'm like, oh, and she thinks it's hilarious. But you know what? I didn't look very manly at that point to her. I didn't look like somebody who was going to take care of her. I've got puke breath and all this stuff. I wasn't very attractive to her, And so, I'm thinking about this case where at this moment in time, it's not like Job was much of a person to look at, not like he was, could do anything to help her. And, so there's a lot going on here, but man, Job's wife is just she's projecting onto him when she's like, hey, you know what? At this point, why do you continue to hold your integrity, just curse God and die? She's probably thinking about herself. Like, I would rather just die right now, And so she's projecting that onto him, and you can kind of get that and understand it to some degree. All right, now we're going to be done with Job. I'll just say some things about Job's wife again at the very end, but we're going to move to the next person, and that is Moses' wife. Now, Moses ends up having a few wives, but we're going to talk about Zipporah. Go to Exodus chapter 4. And again, there's a whole bunch of stories I could use, but these are just kind of the ones that jump out at me. As I was thinking about Job's wife, it kind of started thinking about these others. Exodus chapter 4. let's go over, I guess, to verse 24. Exodus 4, verse 24. And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him, talking about Moses, and sought to kill him. Now, I have seen some commentators try to say that kill him has to do with Pharaoh, which is kind of a bizarre interpretation. I think it's pretty clear it's talking about Moses. But it says that God, basically it's saying God was seeking to kill Moses. Now, the reason that doesn't, I'm kind of getting off script here, but the reason that doesn't naturally make sense and why somebody would want to come up with another explanation is because God just got done saying, hey, you're going to go deliver my people, you're going to stand before Pharaoh, and I've called you to do this, and he's making all these promises, and then it seems weird that all of a sudden now God wants to kill him. So you kind of have to start reading between the lines and say, like, well, what's going on? Why is God all of a sudden wanting to kill him? And well, it gives you the answer here in a minute. Then Zipporah, verse 25, took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. I think what it's saying there is God let Moses go. He's not going to kill him now. Okay? To me, that's the most logical, that's the easiest way to interpret it. Okay? Then she said, a bloody husband art thou because of the circumcision. All right? So she took a sharp flint stone. They knew how to make things sharp back then. They still shaved and cut hair, and they did different things with the stones. And so a super sharp flint knife, and she performs a procedure on her son, a circumcision on her son. Throws the bloody foreskin at his feet and says, thou art a bloody husband. Now again, commentaries are weird, man. These guys went to Bible college and they spent 10 years in college to get these doctorates and stuff like that. And when you read sometimes what they have to say, it's just like, what in the world is this guy talking about? But some people will say that what she did was she ceremonially touched Moses with the blood, and then said, you are basically implying that he has a blood covenant with the people of, and then that's what the circumcision is for, or something like that. It's really weird. I don't understand what they're trying to avoid, other than to say, like, they just can't read the Bible for what it says. The Bible says that, yes, God did tell him, and I think it's probably that can't accept the fact that God might, say to do one thing and then say, okay, because of your behavior, now this is what we're going to do. Okay, because he said, I'm going to send you before Pharaoh, you're going to do this and that. Now, for some reason, this circumcision, not circumcising his son, was enough to bring God's judgment upon him. And so he's so sick now that he can't even move, he can't even do anything. And so it appears, and this is where I have to use some of my own interpretation. I don't exactly know what's going on, but it appears that he's not able to do the circumcision, and so she has to do it so that God would be appeased. And so apparently, because this was the covenant God had told them to do, and he had told him to circumcise his son, and apparently he hadn't done it yet. So God's like, hey, if you're going to go be a representative for me, you have got to do what I commanded you to do. We know that's the way God is, right? Somebody accidentally touches the Ark of the Covenant and he dies for it. I mean, God, if he said to do something, there's no, he's not going to just back off and say, well, I'm going to let it slide because you are Moses. Okay? And so this was enough to make God upset. And then here's Zipporah, having to do this and all right, so I don't know what all is going on. I guess if I remember right, they've been married 40 years, and now, so he was 40 years. Let's see. I'm not sure how they've been married. Yeah, I guess somewhere around there, because he's 40 years in Egypt, 40 years with Jethro there, and then 40 years in the wilderness, basically. So anyway, so they've been married for quite a long time, I would assume. And so maybe she forgot. Going back, maybe she forgot when she first met Moses. Go ahead and go to chapter 2, Exodus chapter 2. Look at verse 16. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters. That's Jethro. That's who becomes Moses' father-in-law. And they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, that's also Jethro, he said, "How is it that ye are come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock." And he said unto his daughter, "And where is he? Why is it that thou hast left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah, his daughter. Now, just kind of fantasizing things through a little bit, because we don't know what really happened. But sometimes when we read about marriages in the Bible, that it's always, now it was almost like a property, like a buying, I was just reading this morning or preaching from Ruth, and it seems like Ruth is just part of this property, you know what I mean? And Boaz is purchasing the property. But hey, there's a love story that's involved there, for sure. And with this case, probably the same thing. I don't think Jethro's just like, you know what, here, have my daughter. I bet there was some kind of a interest, some kind of a love story behind the scenes. I mean, here's this man that just came and delivered them from the shepherds, helped them to water. Like he's obviously strong. He's obviously a guy who can take care of himself, and who knows how he charmed Zipporah, whatever. But here's a man who's not only strong and capable, but Moses was a generous man. He was a gentleman. You ever consider the word gentle and thought, like, wait a minute, it's not very manly to be gentle, because gentle's thought of as like a feminine type thing, okay? But remember this, that how if a man is supposed to be providing for and protecting for those who are weaker, then isn't it also manly, how he demonstrates the fact that he's going to protect them and he's going to provide for them is probably going to come across as being gentle and taking care, right? Because this is delicate to him. This is something that's valuable. And so he doesn't want to, to hurt it. Does that make sense? You put your fragile, you take care of your fragile dishes with, you handle them with care. And so Moses was a gentle man, but that doesn't mean that, he wasn't able to take care of himself. He was what the Bible uses the word meek. He was one of the meekest men, besides Jesus, that ever lived according to the Bible. What is meekness? Okay, we tend to think of meekness and humility and basically just, letting things go maybe, or not being, what it really comes down to is being able to control your actions. And there's a lot of times as men that we could do something. We could flip off the guy that just cut us off, because I cut somebody off earlier, and I'm pretty sure he flipped me off. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I deserved it. But, people get mad, and they're honking, and it's just like, oh, yeah, man, I really did cut him off, whatever. But you know what? We can really hurt people with our words sometimes. Some people are just intellectually able to just pick, and they can win the battle. They they cut like lawyers, you know what I mean? They can win the arguments and stuff like that. And sometimes in your heart, I could cut this person down with my words, or I could beat them up physically because I'm stronger or whatever. But being meek is having the power and the ability to do that and saying, you know what, I'm not going to. I'm strong enough to know that I can, but I'm also strong enough to not do it, to withhold myself from doing that because I'm a gentle man. Okay? That's not a bad thing. That's not an attribute that is unmanly. In fact, that is very manly to be able to control that. It's not manly to just fly off the handle and yell at somebody. It's not manly to push people around and all that kind of stuff. That's not manly. But it is manly to be strong, to be able and capable of providing, protecting, fighting if necessary, and all those kinds of things. And so Moses obviously displayed all these things, and his wife had seen that. But you know what? His wife also is going to be left for quite some time as he goes off into the wilderness and combats the Pharaoh and all that stuff. If she's going to be left, I can't remember where it is. I don't think I wrote it down, but actually I wrote it. Okay, so you don't need to know this, but was like part way here, and we spent all that time loading up and packing everything, and I realized I left my notes at the church, and so I kind of like am trying to remember it all and scribble it all down. I don't think I got this written down, but he's eventually going to leave Zipporah with Jethro. Like it talks like he's sending his wife back to her dad. Okay. Forcing her. Later on, he gets her again, but it's like, hey, I'm going to go do this. Actually, and it's after this whole idea about her, thou art a bloody man, and doing this, and it's like, I don't think she's going to handle I'm reading between the lines, but I don't think she's going to handle this. She better stay with her father-in-law while I go off and do this. Okay, but he ends up sending her back, and he's going to go do all these kinds of things, and she's aware of this, and she's got a lot on her plate, and then here he's sick. She's in the middle of who knows where, doesn't know her surroundings, doesn't know what's coming up, and now there's this, and it's because he didn't take the responsibility of circumcising the son. Now she has to do this thing that wasn't pleasant, and so obviously she loses it a little bit and calls him a bloody man. The third story is my favorite story to talk about when it comes to this idea of women being bitter, and that is David. Go to 2 Samuel 6. 2 Samuel 6. All right. I'll start in verse 1. And again, no, I don't think I want to start there. Let's see, that's too far. Let's go to verse 12. I think that'll be fine. And it was told King David, saying that the Lord had blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that pertained unto him because the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And it was so that when they that bear the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces and sacrificed oxen and fatlings, that David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before God, and she despised him in her heart. The ark of the Lord, and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle of David, that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And as soon as David had made an end to the offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he dealt among all the people, even among the whole multitude, to the women as the men, to every one a cake of bread and a good piece of flesh and a flagon of wine. So all the people departed every to his house. Then David, here he thought he had a great day. Hey, the people love me. The ark is back. God is good. He's happy. He thinks everything's great. And David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, this is his wife, by the way, comes out to meet David and says, how glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself. And David said, it was before the Lord, which chose me before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the house of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore will I play before the Lord. And I will yet be more vile than thus, and will be base in mine own sight. And of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children unto the day of her death. So we see here this story, which I have heard messages preached about how bitter she was, and here David is doing something great for the Lord, and he's so happy and excited about it, and here's Michal just glaring at him out the window and saying, what a shameful thing, and all that. Until you stop and consider all that Michal's been through. Now again, I'm not giving anybody excuses, all right? She has as a Christian, as a a child of God, like she had a responsibility to trust God. God knows what he's doing, submit to her husband, all those kinds of things, yes. But you know what? If we know her story, we understand. As a husband, I look at this story and say, man, David was awful here. He treated her terribly. And this is even though, when she finally is showing that she's got a lot of stuff going on and she's upset, he just takes it off on her and basically says, that's it. I'm done with you. I'm not coming back. You're going to have children. And essentially just leaves her destitute. Doesn't divorce her because, hey, he went through great lengths to get his wife. And so she's there, but she's not really his anymore. Or, they don't have a relationship anymore. Now let's back up. How David and Michal got together. If you remember right, David was a man after God's own heart, doing good. He's supposed to be the next king. And Saul, the current king, sees that everything David does is just prospering, and the people that are singing the songs, remember the ladies are singing the songs, because David was like this, he was this handsome man and this mighty man, and he's a mighty soldier and all this, and I bet you, he could have his pick as far as women goes, okay, and apparently, because he had a whole lot of wives, okay, that's where his son got it from, by the way. Okay, so here David is, when he's young, he killed Goliath, and he's fighting battles and stuff. And so now all the ladies of the land are singing, Saul's killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s. And basically Saul gets jealous. And Saul begins to seek to kill David, and he's going after him and all that. And then he comes up with this plan. He hears that Michal, his daughter, is interested. She's writing his name on her folder. She's got posters of David on the wall. You know what I mean? She's a fangirl or whatever. And he's like, I got an idea. See, because if I offer David a chance to be, married into the king's line, this is just a tremendous thing. And so whether or not he's necessarily attracted to Michal, he'll want to be the king's son-in-law. And so he makes this decree. He says, anybody who goes out and kills, how many is it? Anybody remember 400 Philistines? Or no, he brings back 400. I can't remember. Is it 200? I guess I could just probably go back and read it. But anyway, and so he says, if anyone that does that can be my, he can marry my daughter Michal. And David goes above and beyond, takes care of that, no problem. And so, long story short, Saul's plan is, I'll give Michal to David, they'll be married, and later on I'll use that to get to David, and I can kill him, all right? So he's actually using his daughter as well. But Michal, by this, this later in the story where we just read in chapter 6, she had probably forgotten how she felt about David a long time ago, and how he was just this great man, and how he did all these things, and he loved the Lord, and all these great things about David, she had long forgotten about. And I can tell you why she had long forgotten about it, because here's what she's been through. Michal, eventually, yes, her dad is using her. He's going to come. He finds out that David is in the bed, and he's going to come. She devises this plan. I'm really super paraphrasing for the sake of time, but devises a plan, puts like a statue in there, and tries to make it look like he's in there. And later on, they find out it's not. And long story short, Michal says, he was going to kill me, and so I let him go, and all this kind of stuff. But really, she had helped him and let him down a window so he could escape. And I only can picture as I continue reading 2 Samuel, that she's waiting for that day that her knight in shining armor is going to come back in the middle of the night and rescue her and take her out of there, and they're going to go live happily ever after. But he never comes. Never comes. She's probably hearing all the communication throughout the town, of, oh, David just won this battle, and David did that. Oh, did you hear? David just got some more wives. David just did this and all this. And she's hearing all this, and she's like, how come he never came back for me? All right, so some time goes by, and Michal is given over her, because of the fact that David's never coming back, and they hadn't ever actually, it appears that had never actually been, their marriage had never been consummated, it's never been official. And so some time goes by, and Saul gives her to another man named Phaltiel. Let's go ahead and see if I can find that one. Doesn't sound right, but I think that's right. 2 Samuel chapter 3. Look at verse 13. So some time goes by. David is kind of getting promoted, if you will. He's moving up the ranks. And now Abner wants to make a league with him, and he says, well, this verse 13, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, that is, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when he cometh to my face. When thou comest to my face. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, deliver me my wife Michal, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins. There you go. Of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth said, sent and took her from her husband, even from Phaltiel, the son of Laish. And her husband went with her along, weeping behind her to Bahurim. Then said Abner unto him, go, return. And he returned. So here's this Phaltiel, like now he is married to Michal. Seems like they have a good relationship. I mean, he's obviously pretty upset that she's being taken from him, and he's crying and all that. Now, I would think, again, here's a Michal that used to be attracted to David, and David's this man that can go out and just kill 100 Philistines like that, no problem. And now she's married to this guy, and whenever David comes and gets her, Phaltiel, he doesn't do anything. He just cries about it, and then they say, go, and he goes. So here's this woman, like, can you imagine how she feels? Like, I've got no value. Nobody cares enough about me. I'm just like property. And now David's taking me, just adding me to his wives. Not really important. So obviously, she's upset. So when she looks out the window and sees David dancing around, and he's like this great man of God, and everybody's saying, oh, David, what a wonderful person. She's like, he's an awful person. I do the same thing. Every time I preach on David, I'm just like, David, it should be no surprise he didn't care about Phaltiel, because later on, he finds Bathsheba, has an affair with her, and has her husband put to death, essentially. And so, like, he had no, whatever he wanted, he just got. Now, later on, he'd feel bad about it. He'd get right with the Lord, and this is why God would forgive him. But man, look at it from Michal's standpoint. She had no value. He didn't care about her. He didn't take care of her. And so, as I look through all these stories, trying to think about it from a husband's perspective, and the way that the Bible says that we as men should be in protecting and taking care of our wives, hey, think about what it is. Instead of having this attitude like, yeah, my wife is just so bitter, and she's so hard to live with, and she's so, think about what might be causing that. I'm not giving her an out. I can preach on Mother's Day. I can preach a message for her, okay? But men, what you can do as the leader of the house, the strong one, the stronger vessel, you can say, all right, something's going on here. What needs to change? What can we do to deal with this? And you can try to make sure that you live a life that's not going to upset your wife in that way. And I promise, if you're living for the Lord the way that you should, and you're all those things, the fatherly advice I tried to give on Thursday, like, hey, put God first in everything you do. Love your family, stay out of debt so that you're not like bound, your life's bound to somebody else basically, and just enjoy your family, take care of them, show your love for them, provide for them, protect them, all these things. If you're doing that, then your wife's probably not going to get to that point where she's super bitter. Now, I know people have mental problems and people have, they're unstable for this reason or that reason, but ultimately, here's how it goes, and the Bible made it very clear. The husbands are supposed to love their wives. The wives, and not to be bitter against them. The wives are supposed to submit themselves to their husbands. And guess what? When the wives submit themselves to the husbands, it's a lot easier for the husbands to love the wives. When the husbands love the wives, it's a lot easier for them to submit themselves to the husbands. So it's kind of like God had it all figured out. He knows what we're supposed to do. Just stay in our role, do what we're supposed to do, and we can have a happy marriage, and we don't have to have bitter wives and all that. Okay? Let's go to Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you for the fathers here today, and thank you that we have men who are concerned about being men, and more importantly, godly men, and they're concerned about you being their final authority, your word. And I pray, Lord, as we read your word and begin to think about how we ought to live our lives, that you would help guide us, give us wisdom, and show us how to be the men, the fathers, and the husbands that we need to be. Lord, for any young men that are not quite in that stage of life yet, I pray that you'll help them to learn from the good examples as well as the bad examples, learning what not to do. But I pray that you'll help all the men here provide a good example to the younger men of how to go about choosing a spouse and living with the spouse and caring for the spouse. And I pray, Lord, that you'll just help us do that as we continue to grow as a church and do the work you've called us to do. Help us not lose sight of that. And I pray that you will bless our efforts and be glorified in them in Jesus' name. Amen.